I never thought a can of paint would turn my quiet suburban life into a battlefield. My neighborhood was the kind of place where every lawn was manicured to perfection. Every mailbox stood at the exact same height, and every garage door looked identical. Beige, bland, lifeless. The Homeowners Association made sure of that. They had rules for everything from the height of your grass to the color of your blinds. And for years, I went along with it. I paid my dues, nodded politely at the HOA board. Members during community meetings, and lived quietly in my 2-story house with my wife and kids. But somewhere deep down, I hated how suffocating it felt. Every house looked cloned from the next. Every driveway, every front yard, it was like living in a giant copy-paste neighborhood where individuality had been erased. And then came the day that changed everything. It started on a Saturday morning. My daughter, who had just turned 10, came to me with a sketch she had drawn. It was bright and messy and beautiful, a mix of flowers, stars, and swirling shapes that only a child's imagination could create. She said, "Daddy, wouldn't it be cool if our garage looked like this? Then people would know it's our house." At first, I laughed it off. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. Why not? Why should our garage door look like every other garage on the street? Why not make it ours? So I went to the hardware store, bought cans of paint in every color I could carry, and that evening, with my daughter holding the sketch and my son helping to mix colors, we started painting. We painted long after the sun went down our driveway, lit by a single floodlight. When we stepped back to look at the finished mural, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. It was vibrant. It was alive. It was ours. The next morning, as I sipped coffee on the porch, I noticed neighbors slowing down as they drove by. Some smiled. A few even stopped to take pictures. My kids beamed when they saw their friends pointing at the garage and laughing with excitement. It felt like a victory, but that feeling didn't last long. By Monday morning, a letter was taped to my door. A thick white envelope with the HOA's official seal. Inside was a violation notice. The letter stated that my garage door mural was not in compliance with community aesthetic standards and must be removed immediately to preserve property values. It ended with a warning. Failure to comply will result in fines of $200 per day until corrected. I remember holding that letter, my coffee suddenly tasting bitter. $200 per day for paint on a garage door. That evening, the HOA president himself showed up at my doorstep. His name was Richard, but everyone called him Rick. He was the kind of man who wore polo shirts tucked into khakis even on weekends, the kind who smiled without warmth. He looked at me the way a landlord might look at a tenant who had broken a lease. "Your garage," he said, gesturing toward the mural. "It violates Section 14, subsection B of our community guidelines. You'll need to repaint it back to an approved color. Beige, preferably." "Beige, preferably." "Beige?" I asked, my voice flat. "Yes," he said. "Neutral colors only. This art is a distraction. It lowers the uniformity of the neighborhood, which in turn affects property values." I wanted to laugh in his face, but my kids were standing in the hallway listening. "So instead," I said, "Rick, it's just paint. My daughter helped design it. The neighbors seem to like it." He shook his head. "That's not the point. The rules are the rules. You have until Friday to correct this, or fines will begin." And just like that, he turned and walked away. That night, I sat at the dinner table with my wife and kids. My daughter looked worried. "Are they going to make us erase it?" she asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to promise her that her artwork would stay, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. I'd heard horror stories about HOAs taking people to court, slapping liens on their homes, even forcing them to sell. The HOA wasn't just a group of neighbors. They had real power. But something inside me hardened that night. Maybe it was the way my daughter looked at me, her eyes pleading. Maybe it was the thought of beige paint smothering her creativity. Whatever it was, I decided right then and there, wasn't going to back down. Over the next few days, I started hearing whispers from neighbors. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street told me quietly that she loved the mural. A young couple 2 doors down said they thought it brightened the whole block. But no one wanted to say it too loudly. No one wanted to anger the HOA. Friday came, and I hadn't repainted. That morning, I found another letter taped to my door. This one was a fine note. It's $200 for non-compliance. The next day, another, and another. By the end of the week, the fines totaled $1,400. My wife panicked. "We can't keep this up," she said. "What if they take us to court?" I knew. She was right, but I also knew repainting wasn't an option. Not anymore. This wasn't just about a mural. It was about standing up to people who thought they could control every inch of our lives. One night, after everyone was asleep, I snapped a picture of the mural and posted it online with a short caption. "HOA says this is illegal. What do you think?" I didn't expect much. Maybe a few likes, maybe a few comments from friends. But by the next morning, the post had thousands of shares. People from across the city and even other states were commenting. Some said it was beautiful. Others said HOAs were out of control. A few even shared their own horror stories. Then, local news picked it up. A reporter showed up at my door asking for an interview. Suddenly, the mural that the HOA wanted erased was on television, plastered across social media, and being talked about at City Hall. And that's when everything really started to spiral. Because while I was just trying to save a mural, I didn't realize I had sparked something much bigger, something that was about to turn our quiet. By the time the news crew showed up, I knew there was no going back. It was a Tuesday morning when the first van pulled into the cul-de-sac. A young reporter with a microphone and a cameraman walked straight toward my driveway. My kids watched. From the living room window, their faces pressed to the glass as I stood there in front of the mural that had become the center of everything. "Sir, we heard your HOA has threatened fines over this mural," the reporter began. "Can you tell us what's happening?" I wasn't prepared for cameras. I wasn't prepared for microphones or live broadcasts. But in that moment, I decided to be honest. I told them about my daughter's sketch, about how we painted the mural together, about the fines that were piling up every single day. "I don't think art hurts a neighborhood," I said into the microphone. "I think it brings it to life." Within hours, the story was on every local news channel. By evening, people I hadn't talked to in years were calling me, saying they'd seen me on TV and online. The post had exploded. Strangers were leaving comments by the thousands, telling me to keep fighting, offering legal advice, even suggesting fundraisers to help with the fines. But with every cheer that came from outside the neighborhood, the pressure inside it grew worse. The HOA called an emergency meeting that Friday night. I wasn't invited, but I could feel the tension. Neighbors walked past my house whispering, some glaring, others giving me sympathetic nods. The following morning, another letter appeared on my door. This one was harsher, colder. It said that if I didn't repaint immediately, the HOA would pursue legal action to compel compliance. My wife sat at the kitchen table with the letter in her hands. "They're serious," she whispered. "We could lose the house if they take us to court." I felt the weight of her fear, but at the same time, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had already crossed the line. I couldn't go back, not after everything. That weekend, something unexpected happened. Strangers began showing up at my house, not reporters, but regular people. Families drove in from nearby neighborhoods, parking on the street just to take pictures with the mural. A group of college students stood in front of it, taking selfies and laughing. Kids pointed and smiled. One woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "My son is autistic," she said softly. "He doesn't usually like to go outside, but when he saw your mural on TV, he asked to come see it in person. Thank you." I didn't know what to say. My daughter stood beside me, beaming. The HOA hated it. Rick, the president, stormed down the street one afternoon while a small group of teenagers posed in front of the mural. "This is not a tourist attraction," he barked. "This is a neighborhood. You're violating rules and you're disturbing the peace." The kids scattered, but not before one of them shouted back, "It's just a painting, dude." That night, Rick showed up at my door again, his face red with anger. "You think this is funny?" he asked. "You're bringing strangers into our community. Do you understand how dangerous that is? How disruptive?" I didn't raise my taff. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked him in the eye and said, "Rick, people love it. Maybe you're the only one who can't see that." He clenched his jaw, handed me another fine notice, and walked away. The fines were climbing fast. By the end of the second week, I owed more than $3,000. Friends told me to start a fundraiser, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I didn't want this to become about money. I wanted it to be about something bigger. Then came the twist I never saw coming. One morning, I woke up to find a letter not from the HOA, but from the city. It was an invitation to attend a meeting with the Cultural Arts Committee. Apparently, someone had nominated my mural for recognition as part of the city's public art program. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. How could something painted on a garage door, something my HOA called illegal, be considered by the city as art worth protecting? But it was real. The committee wanted to discuss whether my mural could be designated as a cultural landmark. When I told my wife, she stared at me in disbelief. "If the city protects it," she whispered, "the HOA can't touch it." It felt too good to be true, but for the first time in weeks, hope surged through me. Word spread quickly. Supporters rallied online, urging people to write letters to the city in favor of the mural. By the time the committee meeting arrived, hundreds of messages had poured in. But the HOA wasn't about to let me win without a fight. At the meeting, Rick showed up with a stack of papers and a lawyer by his side. He argued that the mural was an eyesore, that it devalued property, and that allowing it would open the door to chaos. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't bring a lawyer. I didn't bring papers. I just brought the sketch my daughter had drawn, the one that started it all. I held it up and said, "This is why I painted it. Because my daughter asked me." 2. Because she wanted our home to feel like ours. And because art doesn't destroy communities, it brings them together. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone from the committee leaned forward and said, "We've received overwhelming support from the community at large. This isn't just paint on a garage. This is a statement of individuality, of family, and of neighborhood pride." Rick's face twisted in frustration, but I could feel momentum shifting. For the first time, I realized the HOA might actually lose. That night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she asked me, "Daddy, do you think they'll let us keep it?" I kissed her forehead and said, "I think they'll have no choice." But deep down, I knew the fight wasn't over. Because if the city ruled in our favor, the HOA wouldn't just back down quietly. They would dig in deeper, and the real battle would begin. And I was ready for it. The night before the city council's decision, I barely slept. My wife tossed and turned beside me, and I could hear the faint hum of cars on the distant highway. My mind kept playing through every possible outcome. Would they side with the HOA and force me to erase the mural? Or would they stand with me and protect it? The next morning, I dressed carefully: jeans, a button-down shirt, nothing flashy. My daughter slipped her sketch into my hand before I left. "For luck," she said. When I arrived at City Hall, the place was packed. I hadn't expected so many people. Neighbors, strangers, even some of the families who had visited the mural over the past few weeks were there. Some held signs, "Protect art, not beige walls," and "HOA doesn't own our spirit." I felt my chest tighten. All of these people were here for something that had started with my little girl's drawing. The HOA had come prepared too. Rick stood at the front of the room, his lawyer beside him, flipping through a binder so thick it looked like an encyclopedia. When he saw me, his lips curled into a thin smile as though he was already convinced of his victory. The council meeting dragged on. Rick's lawyer spoke first, presenting their argument in cold, legal terms. He talked about property values, uniformity, precedent. He painted a picture of chaos if murals were allowed, houses turned into carnival. Attractions, neighborhoods crumbling into disorder. Then it was my turn. I walked to the microphone, holding the sketch in my hand. I didn't have binders or charts. All I had was a story. I told them about my daughter's imagination, about how we painted together under the floodlight, about how the mural had brought neighbors out of their houses and strangers into our community, not to cause trouble, but to admire, to connect. "This isn't just paint on a garage," I said, my voice steady. "This is what it means to live somewhere and feel at home. It's what it means to create, to inspire. Isn't that what neighborhood should be about?" When I finished, there was silence. Then a smattering of applause broke out from the crowd. The council members looked at one another. I could feel the tide shifting again. After a short recess, the council returned with their decision. They voted unanimously to recognize the mural as a protected piece of community art. It was now officially part of the city's cultural register. The room erupted. People cheered, clapped, even hugged me. My daughter squealed and threw her arms around me when I got home. My wife's eyes filled with tears of relief. For the first time in weeks, the fear of fines and lawsuits seemed to lift, but Rick wasn't finished. The next morning, a new letter arrived, this one colder than any before. The HOA claimed the council's decision didn't override their bylaws and that they still intended to enforce the fines. They threatened legal action again, saying the city had no authority over private community governance. It was a declaration of war. The following days were tense. Some neighbors avoided eye contact with me, afraid of getting involved. Others came quietly to my door at night, offering support but asking not to be named publicly. They were scared of retaliation from the board. Then came something I never expected. One of my neighbors, a retired attorney named Mr. Sanders, knocked on my door. He was an older man who mostly kept to himself, but that evening he stood on my porch with a determined look in his eyes. "I saw the news," he said. "I saw how the HOA treated you. They've gone too far. They want to take you to court. I'll represent you, free of charge." I was stunned. "Why would you do that?" He sighed. "Because years ago, they tried to bully me too. I didn't fight back. I regret it every day. But maybe helping you will make up for that." With Mr. Sanders on my side, I felt stronger than ever. We prepared for what could turn into a legal battle. But while we worked, the mural continued to grow in popularity. Local artists started visiting, leaving small tokens, painted stones, little sketches taped to my door. Someone even started an online petition demanding the HOA drop their case. Within a week, it had over 10,000 signatures. That's when the twist came. One afternoon, as I stood outside watering the lawn, Rick walked up the driveway. He wasn't alone this time. 2 other HOA board members followed behind him. But Rick didn't look smug or angry. He looked nervous. "We need to talk," he said. I crossed my arms. "About what?" He glanced at the mural, then back at me. "The HOA board is under pressure, more than you realize. It's the media attention, the city's decision, the petition. It's bigger than us now." For the first time, his voice lacked confidence. He was struggling. "What are you saying?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Some of us think it would be better if the board withdrew the fines quietly. But others," he stopped, shaking his head. "Others want to push this all the way." I studied his face. This wasn't the same man who had once threatened me with beige paint and fines. This was someone who had realized he might be on the losing side. "I'm not backing down," I told him. "I know." It started with small acts of sabotage. First, a neighbor came over and claimed their dog had scratched my garage door. But the marks didn't look like scratches. They looked deliberate, like someone had tried to scrape off part of the paint. Then, over the next week, I found a thin layer of white paint splattered along the edge of the mural. It was subtle, almost invisible unless you looked closely, but I saw it immediately. Someone was trying to ruin it. I knew it had to be the HOA. There was no one else with a reason or the knowledge of when I was home or away. Their veiled threats had escalated into action. I called Mr. Sanders. "They're starting to mess with the mural," I told him. He frowned. "That's harassment. Document everything. Photographs, dates, times. This could be evidence if it escalates." I did exactly that. Every morning, I took photos of the mural, noting any changes or damage. I installed a small camera at the edge of the driveway, hidden behind a bush. And then, a week later, I got my proof. The footage showed Rick and 2 other board members sneaking onto my property late at night, each holding small cans of paint. They tried to cover parts of the mural, talking quietly to each other. My heart pounded as I watched the video. This was more than disagreement. This was criminal activity. The next morning, I showed the footage to the city council and local police. The reaction was immediate. Suddenly, the fight with the HOA wasn't just a neighborhood squabble. It was official harassment and vandalism. Rick called me later that afternoon. "I know you have the footage," he said. His voice was tight, defensive. "Listen, we can handle this quietly. Let's talk. We don't want it to go public." I paused. "Go public?" "Yes," he said. "If this goes to the press or police, it'll make the HOA look bad." I leaned back in my chair. "Rick, your board already looks bad. You've been trying to fine us, bully us, and destroy a mural that brings people together. It's too late to fix your reputation." He hung up. From that day forward, things changed. The mural became a rallying point. Supporters brought flowers, small handmade signs, and notes of encouragement. Social media buzzed constantly, documenting every update and every attempt by the HOA to interfere. Local artists volunteered to touch up sections that had been vandalized. Our driveway became a gathering place, a safe zone of creativity amid the tension. Then came the real breakthrough. The city council reviewed the evidence of harassment and issued a formal warning to the HOA. They stated that any further attempts to deface the mural or intimidate the homeowners could result in fines, legal action, and potentially the removal of the HOA's governing authority over aesthetic rules. Rick and his board members were stunned. They had underestimated the power of community support, the weight of public opinion, and the authority of the city. Even so, they tried one last maneuver. They held a special emergency meeting and voted to impose additional fines retroactively, claiming that every day the mural had stood violated their rules. The board even sent letters threatening liens against my house. That morning, I stood in front of the mural with my family. My daughter held the original sketch she had drawn months ago, her hands trembling slightly. "Daddy, they're trying again," she whispered. I knelt beside her. "I know, sweetheart. But this time, we have more than paint and drawings. We have everyone who believes in us. We have the city behind us. And we have the truth." We brought everything to Mr. Sanders, who quickly filed a response to the HOA. He documented the harassment. the vandalism, the threats, and the public support. For the mural, he made it clear the HOA could not legally enforce fines against us without risking serious consequences. Over the next few weeks, the tension reached a fever pitch. Neighbors whispered about the conflict at block parties. Local news outlets followed every development. The mural, once just a splash of color on a beige garage door, had become a symbol of defiance, creativity, and community spirit. Finally, the city council convened again. This time, their decision was decisive. They recognized the mural as an official community landmark. The HOA was ordered to withdraw all fines and cease any further interference. The ruling also set a precedent. Homeowners could now express themselves through art, without fear of arbitrary aesthetic restrictions. When the decision was announced, the crowd outside my house erupted. People cheered, clapped, and hugged. My daughter ran to the mural, throwing her arms around the painted shapes she had once drawn herself. My wife held me close, tears streaming down her face. Rick and the board were forced to accept the ruling. They muttered complaints, but they had no legal ground to stand on. The mural was safe. The neighborhood had changed. And in that moment, I realized something profound. What began as a simple act of painting a garage door had transformed an entire community. The mural was no longer just ours. It belonged to everyone who had believed in creativity, individuality, and standing up for what was right. And as I watched people gather around it, taking photos, smiling, and talking, I felt a deep sense of pride. Life after the city council's decision felt surreal. The mural was officially protected. The HOA fines were nullified, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without the constant anxiety of threats and letters. But even as the neighborhood celebrated, I realized the story wasn't just about a garage door. Anymore, it was about community, courage, and change. In the weeks that followed, people continued to visit. Some came with cameras, some with their children, and some simply to stand in front of the mural and smile. Local artists left small editions, tiny painted birds hidden in corners, messages of hope tucked between the swirls of color. My daughter and son added their own touches, small details that reminded us how it all began. The neighborhood, once so rigid and uniform, began to loosen. A few neighbors who had initially opposed the mural started painting small accents on their own home shutters, fences, even door frames. Not everyone participated, but the spark of creativity had been ignited. Our street no longer felt like a lifeless row of beige houses. It had personality, warmth, and life. Rick and the remaining HOA board members were quiet after the ruling. Some moved away, while others accepted the new rules begrudgingly. The power they once wielded with strict control over aesthetics had diminished. And while I knew they still grumbled privately, their authority over personal expression had been fundamentally challenged. One evening, a few months after the council's decision, the city's Cultural Arts Committee contacted me. They wanted to feature the mural in a citywide public art exhibition. They planned to include photographs, interviews, and even a short documentary about the story behind it. I realized then that our little garage door had become more than a neighborhood landmark. It was a symbol of the right to creativity, resilience, and standing up against unreasonable authority. My daughter beamed when I told her, "People will see our mural everywhere," she exclaimed. I laughed, ruffling her hair. "Yes, and they'll know it started right here, in our driveway, with your drawing." The mural also became a lesson for the neighborhood. Meetings were no longer about enforcing strict conformity. New rules encouraged art, gardens, and personal expression. The once feared HOA had to adjust to the reality that homeowners had voices, and those voices mattered. Looking back, I realized how much this experience had changed me. I had started painting the mural as a simple act of love for my children, a desire to bring color into our lives. I never expected it to turn into a movement that challenged authority, inspired a community, and captured the attention of the city. The mural became a meeting point for neighbors. We hosted small art nights, block parties, and fundraisers for local causes, all centered around the colorful canvas that once caused so much conflict. It reminded everyone that creativity could unite rather than divide. That standing up for what you believe in can create meaningful change. Years later, visitors would still come by, asking about the story behind the mural. I would tell them it started with a child's drawing, a little courage, and the refusal to back down in the face of unfair rules. And in the end, it became something much bigger than any of us could have imagined. As I stood in front of the mural one evening, the sun setting behind the colorful swirls, I felt a sense of peace. The neighborhood was alive again. Our family had endured threats, fines, and intimidation, but we had turned it all into something positive. What started as paint on a garage door had become a beacon of hope, a community landmark, and a testament to the power of standing up for what is right. And that, I realized, is the story that will stay long after the paint has dried, the story of how a simple act of creativity can transform lives, communities, and even the world around you. Our mural wasn't just a painting, it was a statement that art belongs to everyone, that creativity cannot be silenced, and that sometimes the walls they build to control you can be transformed into canvases that set you free. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment end so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know where are you watching from. Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, stay happy. Goodbye.